At 2:46 p.m. on March 11, 2011, the ground beneath Japan moved in a way never recorded in modern history. Within 2 minutes, a fault rupture 500 kilometers long tore open simultaneously beneath the Pacific Ocean floor. The earthquake measured 9.1 magnitude, making it the most powerful ever recorded in Japan's entire history. The energy released in those minutes was equivalent to 900 times all nuclear weapons ever detonated on Earth combined. But the earthquake was only the opening act, because what truly erased Japan's coastline arrived 20 minutes later. It was a tsunami, and it was traveling at 800 kilometers per hour, the same speed as a commercial jet aircraft. The northeastern Japanese region, called Tōhoku, covering the prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima, was where all of that fury made landfall. To understand why this disaster was so devastating, we need to travel back tens of millions of years into the past. Japan sits at the intersection of 4 major tectonic plates, making it one of the most geologically active nations on Earth. The Pacific Plate continuously slides beneath the North American Plate at 8 to 9 centimeters per year, quietly accumulating energy over centuries. Every passing year added more compressive force, like a spring being pressed tighter and tighter, waiting for the moment it could no longer hold. The Sanriku coast of northeastern Japan had already been struck by major tsunamis in 1933 and 1960, and residents knew they lived in a danger zone. That is why Japan had built one of the world's most extensive tsunami seawall systems, worth tens of billions of dollars. The city of Kamaishi even boasted the world's deepest bay mouth breakwater, built over 20 years at a cost exceeding $1.5 billion. Scientists at the United States Geological Survey and the Japan Meteorological Agency had been monitoring this fault zone for decades. But the true scale of what was about to happen on March 11th far exceeded every predictive model ever created. March in Tōhoku is the final month of winter. The air still cold, the fields dry and bare, and people beginning to anticipate the arrival of spring. At 2:46 p.m., all of that changed in an instant as the ocean floor snapped upward by as much as 8 meters. The ocean floor snapped upward like a gigantic strike, pushing the entire water column above it upward and generating the tsunami. On land, the shaking lasted 6 minutes, long enough for the entire country to feel it and for people to understand this was no ordinary earthquake. The Japan Meteorological Agency issued a tsunami warning just 3 minutes after the earthquake struck, a remarkable feat of modern monitoring systems. However, the initial warning estimated waves of 6 meters, far below what was actually approaching the coast. Offshore, the tsunami appeared as a barely perceptible swell, less than 1 meter high, but beneath it was a moving water column hundreds of meters deep. When that water column hit the shallow seafloor near the coast, its speed dropped, but its height surged upward, following inescapable laws of physics. Kamaishi Bay, with its funnel shape narrowing deep into the land, inadvertently amplified the wave height many times over. At 2:52 p.m., the Kamaishi Bay breakwater, the pride of Japanese engineering, withstood the force for several minutes before being completely overwhelmed. Even an engineering marvel designed to resist tsunamis could not stop a 14-meter wave carrying the full force of the Pacific Ocean. At Ofunato, also in Iwate, the tsunami reached 23.6 meters, equivalent to an 8-story building rushing directly into the town. But at the narrow valley of Aniyoshi in Iwate, the wave climbed to 41.1 meters, marking the highest run-up recorded for the entire event. The floodwater's inland velocity reached 50 to 60 kilometers per hour, fast enough to sweep away everything humanity had built. At Sendai City, the flat coastal plain, stretching 10 kilometers from the shore, offered the wave absolutely nothing to slow it down. Sendai International Airport, just 2 kilometers from the coast, was completely inundated. Aircraft on the runway swept away like toys. At Ishinomaki City in Miyagi, 4 to 5 meter waves flooded most of the urban area, turning streets into black, debris-choked rivers. The town of Minami-Sanriku in Miyagi, with a population of 17,000, was almost completely obliterated in under 30 minutes. The Shizugawa Public Health Center in Minami-Sanriku became iconic because only its red steel frame survived the wave. Every concrete floor stripped completely bare. Meanwhile, at Rikuzentakata in Iwate, the entire coastal urban area was leveled, leaving only a single solitary pine tree standing in a vast wasteland. That tree, called Kiseki no Ipponmatsu by the Japanese, the miracle pine, became a symbol of an entire nation's resilience. The scientific mechanism behind this extraordinary destructive power lies in how tsunamis behave entirely differently from ordinary ocean waves. Ordinary ocean waves disturb only the top few meters of water, while a tsunami moves the entire water column from the seafloor to the surface. A tsunami, 200 kilometers from crest to crest, contains energy millions of times greater than a normal wave of the same height. When the tsunami hit Tōhoku, its hydrostatic pressure was sufficient to rupture concrete buildings as if they were made of cardboard. Every cubic meter of seawater weighs 1 ton, and the wave descending on Tōhoku contained hundreds of millions of tons of water moving at high velocity. And unlike ordinary flooding, tsunami water does not simply rise. It arrives as a wall, moving at terrifying speed. The 10-meter seawall at Miyako in Iwate was overtopped by a 15-meter wave in under 30 seconds. The wall did not fail structurally. The wave simply exceeded it, revealing the absolute limits of any defensive structure against extreme nature. Across the broad Sendai Plain, water pushed 10 kilometers inland, swallowing 88 square kilometers of farmland, villages, and suburbs. The force of the water was sufficient to carry cars, fishing vessels, and even multi-thousand-ton dredging ships kilometers deep into the interior. At Kesunuma Port, a large oil tanker was pushed into a residential district, and when its fuel ignited, fire spread across the water surface throughout the city. This was a rare and extraordinary phenomenon scientists call a tsunami fire, where water and fire coexist simultaneously. Meanwhile, 40 kilometers to the south, a greater and invisible danger was beginning to form at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The 15-meter tsunami overwhelmed the plant and disabled all backup power systems, causing the reactor cooling systems to shut down completely. With the reactors uncooled, nuclear fuel began melting down, and within 3 days, hydrogen explosions occurred sequentially at reactors 1, 3, and 2. Fukushima Daiichi released significant radioactive contamination into the atmosphere and ocean, becoming the most severe nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986. More than 150,000 residents within 20 kilometers of the plant were urgently evacuated, and many would never be allowed to return. Back on the coastline, the tsunami water did not simply flood inward. It also withdrew with equal speed and force, pulling all debris and topsoil back out to sea. The tsunami did not arrive in a single wave, but in multiple surges, and the second or third wave was sometimes larger than the first. This wave series continued for more than 6 hours, with the final recorded surge reaching Japan's coastline at nearly midnight. Meanwhile, the tsunami radiated across the entire Pacific, reaching Hawaii within 7 hours, and the California coastline after 9 hours. Wave heights at Crescent City, California, reached nearly 2 meters, enough to destroy boats in the harbor and cause millions of dollars in damage. As Japan entered the darkness of night on March 11th, thousands of kilometers of coastline sat in blackout, without electricity, without clean water, without communication. Nighttime temperatures in March, Tōhoku dropped below 0 degrees Celsius, and hundreds of thousands of people faced that night without heating or adequate shelter. Road and rail networks along the entire Tōhoku coastline were completely destroyed, isolating dozens of communities with no outside access routes. Japan's self-defense forces deployed 100,000 troops, the largest peacetime deployment in Japanese history, for search and rescue operations. Simultaneously, some communities situated on high hillsides, untouched by the tsunami, were looking down to find that the entire town below them no longer existed. This is precisely why ancient tsunami warning stone monuments scattered across the Sanriku coastline carried such vital messages for future generations. Some of those stone monuments were over 600 years old, recording tsunamis from the 14th century. Yet people had built homes below them anyway. The Meiji Sanriku tsunami of 1896 and the Showa Sanriku tsunami of 1933 had previously killed over 20,000 people combined along this same coastline. But each generation lived long enough to forget the feeling of the last disaster, gradually encroaching back below the safety line. On March 11, 2011, the Pacific reminded the world of that lesson once again, at a cost impossible to calculate in money alone. The total confirmed dead and missing from March 11th numbered 15,995, with nearly 2,500 never found to this day. More than 92% of total fatalities were caused by drowning, not the earthquake directly, a statistic that says everything about the true nature of this disaster. 232,000 buildings were destroyed or severely damaged, and 321,000 people lost their homes. Total economic losses were estimated at $220 billion, making this the costliest natural disaster in world history at the time. The entire Tōhoku fishing industry, which contributed substantially to Japan's national seafood production, was almost completely wiped out. The total debris mass generated by the tsunami in Tōhoku was estimated at 25 million tons, and 1/3 of it drifted out into the Pacific Ocean. That enormous debris field drifted along Pacific Ocean currents and began reaching the western coastlines of the United States and Canada in 2012. The earthquake physically altered Japan's landmass, shifting the main island of Honshu as far as 2.4 meters to the east and sinking the Tōhoku coastline by up to 1 meter. Seismographs worldwide recorded that the earthquake accelerated Earth's rotation by 1/millionth of a second and shifted the planet's rotational axis by 17 centimeters. This was not only Japan's disaster, but a planetary-scale event, and its aftershocks continued to be felt across the globe. In the weeks and months following the disaster, the geography of the Tōhoku coastline had changed in ways that made it unrecognizable. In many locations, topsoil layers 0.5 meter to 1 meter deep were completely stripped away, exposing ancient gray sediment layers beneath like an open wound. Saltwater and marine sediment infiltrated deep into agricultural soils, rendering tens of thousands of hectares of rice paddies unproductive for years. Nearshore marine ecosystems were also devastated, with traditional aquaculture areas swept clean and inshore reef systems destroyed. The social context of the disaster was also particularly painful, as the majority of the Tōhoku coastal population was elderly due to younger generations having gradually left for major cities. The tragic statistics showed that more than 65% of fatalities were people aged 60 or older. In contrast, a remarkable survival story unfolded at Kamaishi Higashi Elementary School, where every single student survived thanks to genuinely practiced evacuation drills. These students did not wait for alarms or adult instructions, but ran uphill immediately when the ground shook and pulled adults along with them. The Tsunami Preparedness Education Program, developed by Professor Toshitaka Katada, taught children the principle of running to high ground on their own, regardless of anything else happening. The Kamaishi survival story was documented by researchers at Tōhoku University and became a disaster preparedness education model studied worldwide. The greatest lesson from Tōhoku was not to build higher walls, but to transform how people understand their relationship with the land they inhabit. The Japanese government launched a project to build a new seawall system, totaling 400 kilometers along the Tōhoku coastline, at a total cost exceeding 12 trillion yen. However, the biggest debate in Japan after Tōhoku was whether 14-meter concrete walls would actually make people safer or simply create a false sense of security. Many coastal communities refused to relocate to higher ground because their livelihoods were inseparable from the sea. And this is a social equation with no perfect answer. Japan also heavily invested in a new tsunami early warning system, with offshore buoys capable of detecting tsunamis earlier and more accurately than ever before. Japan's J alert system was comprehensively upgraded, enabling tsunami warnings to be broadcast to every mobile device in Japan in under 1 minute after detection. The Tōhoku tsunami also pushed nations around the world to reconsider the coastal positioning of nuclear power plants and review their safety standards. Germany decided to shut down all of its nuclear plants, while many other nations established minimum elevation standards for coastal nuclear facilities. Scientific data collected from the Tōhoku tsunami also significantly improved global tsunami forecasting models worldwide. NOAA's Pacific Tsunami Warning Center used Tōhoku data to recalibrate its models, improving forecast accuracy by 30 to 40%. But the data also revealed something alarming, that the March 11th earthquake itself had exceeded the bounds of the previous models. That means across the Pacific Ring of Fire, other fault zones are accumulating stress beyond what current models can predict. The Cascadia subduction zone off the coasts of Oregon and Washington in the United States is a prime example, accumulating centuries of stress without release. Geological evidence shows that the Cascadia zone last produced an approximately magnitude 9 earthquake on January 26, 1700, with an average recurrence cycle of 200 to 500 years. That was 326 years ago, a figure which geologists regard as a chilling reminder. Returning to Japan, 10 years after March 11th, the coastal cities of Tōhoku had been rebuilt, but many had not recovered the population levels they held before the disaster. The Japanese government poured 26 trillion yen into Tōhoku reconstruction, but questions about the long-term vitality of coastal communities remain unanswered. The Tsunami Warning Stone Monument at Anayoshi in Iwate stood completely intact after March 11th, because the small hilltop community there had acted exactly as its 600-year-old inscription instructed. The inscription on that monument reads, in general translation, that high ground is where the tsunami reached, and homes must not be built below this point. After March 11th, Japan began a program of erecting new warning monuments at positions corresponding to the maximum inundation line of the 2011 tsunami. They were placed so that future generations who hold no direct memory of that day will still know that here, once, there was water. The lesson of Tōhoku is not only about seismic physics or seawall engineering, but about human memory and its extraordinary shortness. Scientists at Tōhoku University developed the concept of tsunami tendenko, meaning when a tsunami comes, each person must run uphill on their own, because that is the only way everyone survives. This is not a cold or indifferent instruction, but the harshest lesson the Sanriku coast has taught over and over again across hundreds of years. The ground beneath our feet is still moving. Tectonic plates are still tightening millimeter by millimeter, and the Pacific's next great rupture is quietly counting down. The question is not whether it will happen, but when it does, whether we will remember the lesson of Tōhoku long enough to act in time.